So we are at the 8th chapter in Sefer Shoftim, and we are now learning, as we're going to now move into the more complex aspect of Shoftim. Up till now, everything has been wonderful, upwards trending, things moving in the right direction, and now things are going to be a little more complicated. And that's how this book will continue. But before we start, a special thank you to Esther and Nachman Goodman, who are sponsoring our learning today, as Esther and Nachman Esther just came back from the bar mitzvah of their grandson, Azi Gewurz, to Ricky and Tzvi in Israel. What a special, where's Esther? Esther was a huge mazel tov. Be'ezra Hashem, there should be continued nachas always. You should travel for simcha. Look forward to welcoming back Nachman soon and being able to wish him mazel tov, Be'ezra Hashem, shortly. Let us learn. So just let's recontextualize ourselves, and then we'll get into business. If you remember, what happened is the nation of Israel are completely persecuted by this band of pillagers, and they are led by Midian and Bnei Kedon and Amalek, all these eastern Bedouin tribes that come in, the crops ripen, and they pillage and take everything away. That's what ends up happening. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu then sends word and establishes a new leader, a very unlikely leader, because he himself doesn't think he should be a leader. He keeps asking Hashem, can you prove to me that I'm a leader? I'm going to interrupt to say, welcome back to AB Najjar. It's so good to have you back in business. So there's just so much to understand over here. He goes into battle. He starts off with tens of thousands of people, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu says too many people. He does the water test, and he whittles off a whole bunch. He does the fear test, and a whole bunch go away. Then he does the water test, and he's down to 300 versus 130,000 troops of the Midianites, and they have this miraculous battle. They have the shofars and the torches and in the containers, and they break them, and there's confusion, and they're running, and they capture two of the kings by the banks of the Jordan, and everybody. It's an amazing victory. We now pick up over here in the aftermath of the battle, and the aftermath of the battle is not as clean. Okay, so here we go. We're going to experience a significant amount of ambiguity in our feelings towards Gideon at this time. So let's start over here. Our perek starts off with two disagreements. The first disagreement, and this happens because human beings, or maybe I'll say male human beings, when it comes to this, is there's a lot of ego involved. And so what happens is that the Shevet of Ephraim turns to Gideon and says at the beginning of the first pasuk in the perek is Vayamru Elov Ish Ephraim Ma davar hazeh asher asisa lanu levilti k'ros lanu ki halachta lilachem b'Midian. Well, you didn't call us. You didn't call us when we were going into battle. V'yirivun itay b'chazka, and you went and fought against him without acknowledging us. And Gideon responds very diplomatically, right? So he says, his me'asisi atayt akachem says halay toiv olalois Ephraim mi betzir Aviezer, right? The prunings of Ephraim are better than the harvest of Aviezer, and so this is the first we'll call it little scuffle, right? And they calm down, and he carries on pursuing them. He pursues the remaining Midianites and their kings to a place, and they're moving eastwards, and he comes across a city called Sukkot. And he comes to them and he says to them in Pasuk, so look, I've got a lot of troops, we're running, it's been a long battle, just give us supplies so we can continue the battle. And the man of Sukkot says, Hakaf zeva v'tzalmona ata biyadcha ki nosan letzvaecha alechem. So look, do you have the kings? Like, can you show me them incarcerated that we'll supply you with bread? Like, when you have proof of concept, we'll be happy to jump on board. Then it goes further. He comes to another place called Penuel, and he said to the same thing, please give us supplies. And the people of Penuel said the same thing. And he responds to them and he says, when I come back with these kings, I will come and punish you for your way of talking to me. Because let's just unpack these two scuffles for a moment. So the first thing just to be aware of, in terms of just the map, just to let's just appreciate the difference. So you can see it in small in the notes, and in big over here over here is that you have, remember he is from the area of Menashe. So he's in the area of Menashe. That's the northern part of Menashe is where Gidon is from. And as such, when he goes downwards, he takes his forces primarily from Menashe soldiers. Aviezer is from Menashe. When the battle actually is prosecuted, what ends up happening is, this is the last one. Perfect. Is that he tells Ephraim to close the Jordan to stop them escaping across the Jordan before they get there. So Ephraim, in terms of being affronted, Ephraim is saying, why were we called last? Why did you only call us when you were succeeding, not when the battle was starting? That's the question that he has. Now, in all honesty, the answer that really is, technically speaking, right? What's the real answer? Is God didn't want a big army, right? Meaning God told me,
do this.
Right? He said, send back the people who are scared, send back the people who drink on their all fours, and so therefore he dictated the size of this army. Fair, right? But it's important that in life is being right. And then there's also making things right. And you can be right and get upset and say, God told me, and how dare you? That's going to just escalate things, right? So as human beings, we're not intellectual creatures. We are emotional, social creatures. So therefore, the way he explains it is no, it's all right. You're better than us, and then it feeds the ego. It's very helpful when dealing with other people in this respect. Okay, so just to understand, but that's their particular question. The language that he uses, just like let's use the mashal that he uses. He says the prunings of Ephraim are better than the harvests of Menashe, right? So what's the we'll call the mechanics of that parable? So it seems that it could be referring to the effect in battle, meaning you killed the kings, meaning we started the battle and the whole business, we were doing the harvest, but you killed the kings, which really decapitates much of the army, so your pruning, so to speak, was more effective than ours. But it may also be like this, is the prunings are the best, right? So are the cutoffs, the unnecessary. He says, in terms of people, he says, your people, or the harvest of Menashe is not even as good as the cutoffs, the offcuts of Menashe. So whichever way he's doing it, and this is the Ralbag and the Radak say, but the point is different. It's very important when dealing with people, right? Don't be right? Make it right? So that's what he's doing, and he does it very effectively. At this point in time, we have to stop. We have to say, wow, what a diplomat, right? No personal agenda, no skin in the game. He does this in such a magnificent, noble way. We're like, this is great. We have a warrior who's a diplomat. The problem is that's not the way that it continues. But just understand that he's able to navigate this complexity. All right. Now the next situation. We have Sukkos and Penuel. Are they Israelite cities or are they Canaanite cities? The answer is mixed. They are actually Israelite cities. So if you go over here, so if you look at the map, the way it works is that they cross. There's in the area of Gad is what's called the Yabok stream, right? You can't visit as much today because it's in Jordan, but one of the tributaries of the Jordan River is the Yabok, and if you go eastwards along the Yabok, Sukkos and Penuel are on the banks of it. So they are actually Gad cities. They are belonging to the tribe of Gad. So these are Israelite cities. And there's a lot of interesting things to think about. First of all, first thing to think about is we know both of these names beforehand, right? We've known these cities beforehand because we've seen them both in the Torah. So the first city of Sukkos is the place where Yaakov Avinu encamps, and he calls it Sukkos. Why? Because right? He makes like cattle sheds for his sukkahs. We see this in the Torah. So it's a place, and this is where this is about to unfold in the Shechem business. There's a whole Yaakov Avinu's traveled back from Haran, right, all the way back to Israel, goes along the east bank of the Jordan, and then he comes across, right? So that's what it seems to be. And if you remember, we'll get there in just a second, but that's in terms of Sukkos. Sukkos is a place of expressing, we'll call it, great agricultural success on Yaakov's side. The next place is Penuel. We know about that as well because that's the place that Yaakov fights the angel. In fact, if the stream that Yaakov was crossing back and forth to get those Kalim was the Yabok, right, which is this stream over here in the area of Gad. That was where his crossing. That's where his nightly encounter happens. His night encounter happens with the angel. It's a place which displays great physical security, right? Which is why it's so ironic that the requests he has here are rebuffed. What is he asking for? He's asking just for a little bit of bread, right? And they say, no, we can't give you bread, which is ironic because Sukkot is the place which was established when there was agricultural security. And then they say, well, we're scared, but it was the place where Yaakov, our ancestor, fought and felt greatly secure in that place. So there's an irony in both of these places. These are both Israelite cities. But why is it they actually refuse to help? So they express it in terms of fear, right? So they express it. Sha'atom ispo'er shi'atzalti miyad min yad. Rashi says that, look, you haven't yet caught them. We haven't seen any results of your battle. There's only 300 of you. How are we to believe that you conquered them, right? Meaning, show us the proof. Imagine that you were living in Sukkot at this time, and you see a ragtag bunch of 300 Israelites, and they say, "We've just beaten Midian, and help us!" And you're like, right? So like, what's really going on over here? And it gets into like the complexities of partisan politics, which is very, very difficult. Like this is like how this worked in World War II. If you like, just read the stories. It's any war, terrible stories. Like Italy was a fascist regime, but ultimately it was really controlled by Germany towards the end, and then the Germans really sort of took over and actually killed many of the Italian soldiers actually, as they took over in southern Italy. And I just remember, my personal experience. I remember there's a beautiful book. It's turned into a movie called Captain Corelli's Mandolin. I remember, and it was a sort of as the Germans are pushing back the Italians, and they literally kill all the Italians on the way, right, as they take over. And what's fascinating is when the partisans push out the Germans, right? So what do? The first thing they do is they kill all the Italians who were supportive of the Germans, right? Meaning, in this game, there's no neutrality, unfortunately. In the game of war, you're with them or against them. And what happens is Gideon is making a very difficult proposition for these people. He's saying, I want you to forsake your neutrality by supporting us. But like from their perspective, they're going to say, well, there's 300 of them. There's tens of thousands of running troops. If this doesn't work out and we supply them the bread, we've killed ourselves, right? Meaning we're dead. So there's complexity of the neutral parties in war. Which side do you support? It's a bet. It's a bet you're taking, and the bet is not on money; it's on the lives of your people. So it's very complex. You can understand the fear they're having over here. Just there is an irony over here. I noticed that there's an irony, which is that here you have Ephraim saying, "You didn't give me enough death to appoint." I mean, I wanted to be involved in killing more of the Midianites. And he has to like sort of tone it down. And here you have the people of Sukkot and Penuel saying, we don't want any part of this, right? So that means you're in communal leadership if both sides want opposite things, right? But that seems to be what's happening over here. So what ends up happening? So if we go back to the Psukim, we hear that he goes, he has a night of, he's pursuing tens of thousands of people, and he catches them in Karkara, which is towards the south, the southeast. And he destroys their army. It describes that they came at night, they came over the hill, but these 300 people killed 120,000 souls. I mean, it's crazy numbers, astronomical numbers, right? They capture the kings, the two remaining kings, because the first two kings were killed by the people of Ephraim. Now, the remaining kings are named as Zevach and Salmunah. That's the names of these Midianite kings. He captures them, and he brings them back, and he comes back to Sukkot. And he comes to the people of Sukkot. He captures a person who belonged to the city of Sukkot, and he tells the fellow, please write out for me the names of all the elders, all the leaders of the city. He takes them, and then we have a very disturbing scene where it describes, he comes back to Sukkot, and he says, he brings the kings of the Midianites, and he says, you said that only when I have the kings in my hand would you help me. He says, well, here are the kings. He says, I have the kings now. ויקח את זקני העיר, פסוק ט"ז, ואת קוצי המדבר ואת הברקנים, ויועדה בהם. He takes them and he tortures them with the thorns of the desert, to the elders. Then he goes to Penuel, Vest Migdal Penuel Notatz Vayaroges on Sha'ir. And he goes to Penuel, he destroys their tower, they have a tower protection system, and he kills the people of Penuel. These are Israelites, these are not Canaanites. A very, very strong suggestion. We'll stop here before we go a little further. Like, what is going on over here? What is he trying to accomplish in this particular situation? So the first thing is that the Abarbanel tries to give reasons. He says, look, the first thing is they didn't join his war effort. The second thing is they didn't support his troops, even though they weren't joining the war effort. Number three is they were rejecting me as a leader of Israel. And it goes back to what he quotes a passage in Yoshua, where the nation of Israel say to Yoshua, "Kol ish asher yamres becha, you must." Anybody who rejects the king, so to speak, the leader, will die. And he's saying, "I'm the leader. You're rejecting me. I'm going to kill you." Right? And in a certain sense, there's a little bit of a difficult conversation going on over here, because think about the way he views himself, and think about the way they view him. Right? How does he view himself? He views himself right now as a national leader. So even though he belongs to the tribe of Menashe, he comes to God and he says to them, we're going, supply us, help us. And they say, who are you? Right? Like you are from the smallest family of Menashe and Avi Ezri. That's really nice. But listen, we've got our own state government here, and we do things our way, and we have elders, and we make decisions. Who are you to tell us what to do? Right? So they're speaking from, we'll call it a tribal perspective. We'll call it state level, right? He's speaking to them a federal level. He's saying, on a national level, I'm the guy. I've just destroyed them. You do what you need. You need to join us as part of this. This conversation, or this breakdown in communication, is the breakdown not in communication, but in conceptualization of leadership right now. What is a leader supposed to be? How national or how localized is leadership? And they say, we don't really have so much to do with you, right? Ironically, Ephraim was saying the opposite. Ephraim was saying, if you are the national leader, then why are we part of it? But they're saying, we don't believe in national leaders, or this is not our business, or whatever else they could have said. And that's part of the breakdown over here. Which leads us to the question, which is how much of a national leader is he? Does he have the rights to be a national leader? Or based on what is he coming to them with? We're going to see a number of actions he's about to take, which sound like he conceptualizes himself, or he thinks of himself as a king. He's acting like a national figure, not like a tribal figure. And that being the case, in a certain sense, he's demanding something which they've not yet reached. They've not, so to speak, socially, anthropologically arrived at this level of leadership. So now, when we come back to it, why is it? You'll notice that he attacks both of them, but what does he do? He tortures the leaders of Sukkot, and he kills the people of Penuel. Why did the people of Penuel get killed and not just punished, like corporal punishment? Interesting, right? Why is it? There's a really simple reason. Two reasons. Reason number one, and the Mefarshim addressed this, is that when they came back, this is what the Radak suggests, is he came back and he said, I'm going to punish you by not torturing you, but by destroying your Migdal, right? That was because one of the primary, called, skyline things in Penuel was they had a tower. So he's about to destroy the tower, and guess what? They weren't having it, so they defended it, right? So, most people, the comedian, the fellow says, your money or your life, and he says, just wait, I'm thinking, right? So for them, they're trying to defend the tower. So in defending the tower, they got killed. But it wasn't that he came to kill them; he came to destroy the tower, which is what he said, right? That's what the Radak says. So this wasn't intentional; this was collateral. But the way the Malbim says it is no, it was the opposite. Sukkos may have been successful agriculturally, but it had no defenses, which means when they had the proposition of taking a risk by siding with the Israelites against the Midianites, they had no defenses if the Midianites were going to come back, right? So let's say the Midianites came back after this group were destroyed, right? And they say, did you give them food? And then they'd all be killed. They had no defenses, right? But Penuel did. Penuel had a tower, which means because they had a tower, they had less of an excuse to make, says the Malbim, about security. Because take a risk because you have the defenses necessary against the Midianites. And the fact that you didn't means to say that your no is a worse no than the people of Sukkot, which is why it is destroyed. That's what the Malbim says over here. Just fascinating in terms of the complexity over here. But again, acting over here is on a national level. We meet our next level of. By the way, at this point in time, if you were to say, before we go to the next stage of the story, if you were to say, is his action, are the actions that Gideon is taking at this point in time personal or are they professional? Right? It's always an important question to ask about people acting. Personal or professional? Right? At this point in time, I think we could make the argument this is professional. Right? I think we could make the argument to say there's a national security issue, and these people are being made a example of is that when a national leader comes and you don't agree, this is how you're going to be treated, and so in the future people are going to sort of step into line. Right? You could argue that. The complexity is we have to ask that question about every stage of his actions, and we're going to have blurring of personal and professional boundaries in just a second. Let's go into the next stage of the story, which is remarkable. So here we go. The next stage of the story is he comes like these kings, he punishes Sukkot and Penuel, and now he has these two kings. And in Pasuk Yud Ches, he turns to Zerach and Salmonah, these captured Midianite kings, and he says, Eifa Anoshim in Pasuk Yud Ches asher ragtem betavor. So he says to the Midianite kings, who are the people who you captured at Tavor? Remember, Tavor is the mountain by the Kinneret. That's where this is all going on. That's where the battle occurs. He says, who are those people that you captured at Tavor? And they say, oh, they looked just like you. And he says, come on. And by the way, they say, Qatar B'nai Melech. They notice that he's acting like a king. He says, they look just like you. And then he says to them, he's Vayomar, and he says, Achai b'nei imihem. They were my uncles, right? So sorry, my brothers, from my mother. Chai Hashem lu achi yisem osam lo yaragti eschem. If you had not killed them, I would not kill you. And then he turns to his son, Vayomar le'yasa b'chara, he turns to his firstborn, and he says, Kum harog esam, he says, execute them. He was not initiated in this business. And I remember seeing an advert in Saudi Arabia for executioners wanted. There was it's like a job posting, like good with the schmitter, right hand preferred. But the truth is that they weren't. It's terrible. I mean, unfortunately, they kill people in parking lots there. They're still, they take people out and they literally today. We're not talking about a Western country, so he says execute them. They're not interested in this. He's not able to do this, and they turn to him and they say, listen, we want to get killed by you, right? By a strong man, right? We don't want somebody fumfering around. It's going to be it's going to be a long and painful process. So he goes and he executes them. So like these two little episodes require a little bit of unpacking. The first is this is what you see this description over here is telling us something which we didn't know happened beforehand, because this wasn't described beforehand. It seems that when this was going down, and while Gideon was busy filtering his men, at this point in time, the Midianites must have known something is afoot, and as a function of that, they must have taken hostages. Right? In fact, it sounds like the hostage taking was intentional. Right? It doesn't sound like they said, oh, let's just take. They specifically, and how do you know that they know about Gideon? Is because the fellow in the Midianite camp who's having the dream about the barley bread, the whole business, he says, I have a dream that Gideon is going to come and destroy the camp. So either that was completely a message from God, or they hear there's unrest among the natives, right? And when they hear the unrest among the natives, they say, let's, for a safety procedure, take a few hostages so that if something happens, we will use them as leverage. Unfortunately, hostage situations with Israelites is not a new thing, right? This is thousands of years where they use us against us, right? But it must have been, it sounds like, from the fact that Gideon is asking what's going on, it sounds like in the fog of war, we don't know what happens, they're killed in the war. So his brothers are killed in the war. So the hostage leverage situation did not pan out. In running, they kill the hostages, right? And now Gideon says to them, you made a mistake. Because if you hadn't killed them, I wouldn't kill you. And now I'll ask you the question again. Is he acting professionally or is he acting personally? And it becomes more complicated because that's not the way a leader speaks. Right? You don't say things like that. There's due process and there's accountability, but you don't say it's because you did this or you didn't do this. Right? There's an element of personal vendetta seeping in, which seems to be, and that's clouding the scene over here. The Malbim tries to exonerate him by saying, you know what he's saying? He's saying like this. He says, if you hadn't killed them, then I would have afforded you due process. I would have taken you to our courts, and we would have cross-examined, and then we would have executed you as prisoners of the state. He says, but because you killed them, that's why I'm not going to give you due process. I'll kill you right now on the battlefield, even without arms. Right? So meaning the Malbim is trying to explain that the accusation he's making is not real, right? Meaning it can't be that he wouldn't kill them if it wasn't for the fact that he killed his brothers, right? But nonetheless, there's a little bit of an aftertaste that we have here as the readers, and we're saying that's not exactly. And then it calls us into question is when he destroyed Penuel and Sukkos, it now also begs the question is, was that purely professional, or was that because also, right? You have to understand. Anytime you have a personal vendetta, suddenly it makes other things more complicated, right? Yeah.
Could it be that he wanted to teach a lesson?
No question he wanted to teach a lesson, but still the way he said it is wrong, right? The way he said it is if you hadn't killed my brothers, then I wouldn't have killed you. That means to say that there's something about his own experience which is demanding this. Now, the other thing, which is interesting enough, is about his son, right? It's very unusual. Very unusual. We don't see people initiating their sons so much since the beginning of Navi, right? Torah, lots of, right? But Torah was family, right? We're now national. We're no longer dealing with family and tribes. We're dealing with a national entity called Israel. Initiating sons we've never seen beforehand. That sounds like something which is a different system of government. What's that system of government? It's called? King, right? Kings have dynasty, right? Which means to say there's continuation from generation, there's a dynasty from generation to generation. He's speaking to his son in a way which sounds a little bit like he's speaking to him like he wants this to continue, right? And in fact, Zevach and Salmunah notice that. And they say, the people we killed, the hostages we killed, were Ketor Pnei HaMelech, were like the king. There seems to be an aspiration for kingship here, even in the way he's treating his firstborn. Some of them unfortunately turn this down and say, no, you know why he asked his son? Because his son was a Goel Hadam. Right? We know that there's this notion of a redeemer of blood. It was his uncles who were killed, so he's saying, I'm initiating you as a Goel Hadam. But still, even such, he's the closer Goel Hadam. So it's strange.
How come it can't be considered that maybe he really thought himself as a king and they were getting killed because they were lowered from office?
Yes. So by the way, yes. So you could say this over here, that really he's taking this not personally but nationally, right? And that's what he's saying. And if that's the case, then it is completely professional what he's saying. It's still a little strange way it says if you hadn't killed him. But yes, it sounds like all these actions right now. So let's line up the last, we'll call it 3 actions. He comes back and he punishes Sukkos and Penuel. He then says, because you killed my brothers, I'm going to execute you. And then he initiates his son. All 3 of those seem to be talking from a national kingship standard, right? And by the way, in case you think that we're imagining this, nobody else misses this because that's the next pasuk. What's the next pasuk? The nation of Israel say, wow, you're acting in a way which sounds like a king, right? And they say, in pasuk Chol Beis, Vayomru ish Yisrael el Gidon, Mishol bonu gam yato, gam bincha, gam ben bincha. So they say, you're acting like it, be it. Become a king. We want continuity. One of the biggest problems in the Sefer of Shoftim is that the system of government of Shoftim is meritocracy, which means anybody who steps up to the plate is going to be the leader. The problem with that is, once they step down, there's no one to fill their place. There's no one next in the order. So they say, listen, we're tired of this. This keeps going up and down and up and down. We want it to be that you will, in fact, be part of a dynasty. We want you to be the leader with your children as well. And you think this is it. You see him reaching for the crown. So you say the people are giving it to him. This is the moment we can short circuit all the problems later on. And it's just amazing. He does an about face. He does a turn and he says in the pasuk Al Gimel, "Vayamar lani Gidon, lo yimshal ani bachem, v'lo yimshal b'ni bachem, Hashem yimshal bachem." God will rule over you. Right? It's an amazing thing. In a certain sense, what he's saying is system of government doesn't matter. Theology matters. He's still Yerubbaal. He's still the one who says the reason the battle's being won is amazing. He's able to detach, unhitch himself, is because theologically we rejected the Baal. If we rejected the Baal, that's why we're succeeding, right? But don't think it's because systems of government is what's going to cause it. It's just so hard because systems of government do play into that. Well, that's called the physical, that's the vehicle through which God acts, but which system you choose has ramifications, right? But nonetheless, he desists from this. It's an amazing thing. He pulls back. But then he says, and it just gets, each stage gets more and more complex. Because then he says, really the next pasuk in Chodalet, he says to them, Eshala mikem she'ila. I'd like to have one request. Is it Tanili ish nezem shlaloi ki nizmei zahav lahem ki yishmaelim haim. He says that you've just captured all these Ishmaelites, and he says, please take off your rings that you captured from them, because that was their custom. And he says, please put them into this container, or this simla, and they put them into a fire, and they make it into a beautiful golden ephod. An ephod is some sort of like tunic, and he places this golden tunic as a war memorial in his town, and that's what he Ba'afra. And the pasuk tells us, "Vayiznu kol Yisrael acharav sham vayili gidon leveson hamokesh." But people started already turning to this some sort of deity already. So it already lost its power already. But it's a really, really strange moment. So just a few things to notice over here is that, just a quick interesting question is the author of Sefer Shoftim is? We don't spend so much time thinking about this, but who's the author of Sefer Shoftim? Shmuel Navi. It's very important because his thesis in general in life is in terms of systems of government, is anti-king, right? So Shmuel is not a fan of kings, it sounds like, right? And in fact, these words that Gideon say are the words that Shmuel will later on say as well. Meaning, when they request a king later on to sidestep Shmuel, Shmuel says, God is your king, right? Not the system of government. So in a certain sense, Gideon is a proto-king, but also a proto-Shmuel, right? He's pushing back on the notion of kingship over here as well. And I'm going to leave a question for us, which we'll deal with Bezra Hashem in the later chapters, is that it does seem that the Sefer Shoftim is also a polemic against the lack of kings. Meaning, it seems to also support kings later on because of Pesel Mechan and Pelegesh Begeva, which we will get to. And in there, it sounds like the lack of a king is a problem. But here, so we have to ask ourselves, what is the thesis of Sefer Shoftim when it comes to kings? Because here, Gideon is rejecting it. The author of the book is rejecting it as well, right? He's emphasizing the story. But why is it that what is the actual thesis that's being portrayed over here? Now, it's something which is worthwhile. Yeah, Abi.
I'm just saying that I don't think there's a contradiction at all, because we say God is king, and when Shmuel says God is king, that's the ideal, in terms of whatever. The king, the human king, is subordinate to God. So there is another level. So he said, he points up to the God as king, that's fine, but in terms of the Jewish people, in order for government to be formed, unified body, etc., the king, the human king, acts like in subordination to the rules of God and God's.
It should be. So, but you're pointing out the subtlety, the grayness over here. And in this respect, Gideon does not accept grayness. It's ironically he's saying it's either God or right. So that's the complexity in this situation. Ironically, it would be better if perhaps somebody could navigate that gray, right, and say, "I will be a king subordinate to God." Right? And he hasn't managed to do this. Just in this particular episode, there's two biblical parallels which I'm going to leave for you to think about. Number one is where do they get the Nizamim from, these nose rings? This is from the Ishmaelim. Now, I don't know about you, but the last time I read the Perek, they weren't fighting the Ishmaelim. They were fighting the Midianim. Right? So the Mefarshim say, yes, but we have heard of Ishmaelim who are Midianim beforehand. Very good. So if you go back to Parshas Vayeshev, it describes in the same pasuk that I put it here in the sources 16. Vayavru anashim midyanim sacharim. The Midianites were coming by the bore where Yosef was. Vayimshuch vayalus Yosef min habor vayimkuru Yosef leYishmaelim. Right? So much so that the Rashbam there says there were two groups of people. Yeah. Meaning, in fact, that the brothers never sold Yosef, according to the Rashbam. It was the Midianim who sold him to the Ishmaelim. That's what it says. But most of the Mepharshim say, no, the Ishmaelim is the general category of all traders, which means that the Midianim Ishmaelim is another name for Midianim. Isn't it interesting that Tanakh is borrowing the same parallel of Midianim and Ishmaelim right here, in this place? What do you make of it? So I had noticed actually in the Mamno'ez, and the Mamno'ez quotes a sefer called the Kli Yakar, who says that one of the themes of what the brothers ask Yosef when he presents his dreams at the beginning of Parshas Vayeshev, what's their question? Are you going to be a king over us? in a certain sense, it's like Tanakh is giving us an echo of that question. In the very place where Gideon himself is asked to be a king, but he does not want to be a king. That question or that dream of Yosef is being echoed over here in the Yishmaelim Midyanim echo over here, because that's the question on the table. That's the Aleph. That's parallel number 1, which is worth our noticing. Parallel number 2 is he makes this golden image, and we, with all the best of intentions, because we've forgotten this point in time. Once we have victory, like after the 6-day war, it's like, wow, look at us. We were fantastic. There were 300 men. There were 130,000 Midianites, right? So Gideon, this is a religious act. He's saying, this is amazing. We need to capture this moment in time, right? We need to take the gold and make something that people will remember, right? But it doesn't work out so well. But guess what? This actually has happened beforehand as well. Because the same thing happens when the nation of Israel and Parshas Kisisa come to Aaron and say, Asay lanu Elohim, right? Make for us some sort of deity. There's a whole debate between the Mefarshim. Is this Avodah Zarah, as Rashi says, based on Chazal? But many of the Mefarshim reject that. The Bechor Shor said they're looking for a leader. You know what the Kuzari says, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, in this commentary? He says no. He says, do you remember what was the first command that Hashem gave when Moshe Rabbeinu came off Har Sinai in Parshas Yisro? What was the first thing? Moshe Rabbeinu comes down and he out of the cloud. What does Hashem tell Moshe Rabbeinu? Do you remember what's the first commandment? Right? He says, do not make yourself Elohei Chesed, Elohei Zahav. Lo yisasu itchem. Don't make golden and silver images. Now, if you were keeping track, because we just passed Shavuos, right? The second Aseret Dibros was not to make pagan images, right? So why would God be giving the same command after the Aseret Dibros? He's giving the Aseret Dibros, and he says, by the way, envy next to number 2. Is that what's happening? Like, why is he saying don't make gold and silver images? The Mefarshim say he was not talking about pagan deities. You know what he's talking about? He was saying like this: you just experienced the divine, the cerebral. You saw the fire, the lightning, everything. It was so big. You know what people like to do when they've seen something really big? Is they like to crystallize it in a way they can remember it. And he says, don't make images of what you saw in front of me. And this is halachically speaking. You're not allowed to make images of people. You're not allowed to make images of suns and moons. Right? This all comes from that mitzvah. It's not about Avodah Zarah. It's going to turn into Avodah Zarah, right? But at the beginning, it's from this. We so want to capture a moment. God says, don't capture this moment. Gold is like fire, and silver is like lightning. Don't try to capture what you're seeing in the divine. Don't do that. It's not going to end up well. Gideon's doing the same thing. He's asking the people, take the gold, let's melt it down, let's make a memorial. Why is he doing this? He wants to capture this moment. Think about God. This is the 6-day war of the day, right? Even more on steroids. But it's not good. It's not good. And we're told that the same problem happens again. It's a human fallacy that we think we can capture God moments in ways that God doesn't want us to capture them, right? By the way, were they right about capturing moments? Yes. Later on, God says, make a Mishkan, and according to the Ramban, every part of the Mishkan is a representation of what happened at Har Sinai. We need those places, but God says, I'll tell you how to do it. You don't do it in your terms, because the same thing happened. So again, this aspiration for a religious, we'll call sentimentality, but it ultimately turns into a mokesh, as the Psukim tell us. We come to the end of the parak, because I know it's been a long parak, we're going to try to close right now. The parak concludes with a very, again, surprising statement. So we now know that there's peace in Israel for 40 years, which is really fantastic. That means he was a very successful leader. And he goes and settles down, and he has 70 children, 70 sons. Okay? That's not from one wife, just in case which means to say he's marrying many wives, right? Now, by the way, marrying many wives also something that kings do. Okay, just to point out that, meaning that's another aspect. He's denying being a king, but on the other hand, he's having a lot of sons. That seems to indicate dynasty. Similarly, then he goes on and he says, and it says that he has a Pelegesh. Rambam says that only a king can marry a Pelegesh, just interestingly enough, post-Matan Torah. But he marries a Pelegesh and he has a son, and he calls his son Avimelech in Shem. Now, just to translate the word Avimelech for a second. My father is a king, right? So there's complexity in who he is. I don't want to be a king, but I'm going to have many sons, and I'm going to have a son who I'm calling my father's a king. It's complicated. It's complicated as to, again, asking the same question, professional or personal. It's so complicated in we'll see a little bit more how this plays out next parak. Be'ezras Hashem. He settles down. He gets buried. He's buried in Ofra, where he grew up. Okay. And the last psukim are quite sad, Because what happens is that right after his death in Pasuk Lamed Gimel, we see the nation of Israel start serving Baalim, so there's the Canaanite local gods. V'lo zachru ben in Pasuk Lamed v'lo zachru b'nei Yisrael es asher Elokeihem hamatzil es samiyad kol oveim yisrael. They got God who saved them. V'lo asu chesed in beis Yeruval Gidon v'go kochol ha'tova asher asam Yisrael. They didn't do chesed with the house of Gidon as well. So there's this incredibly fast recession into their old ways. And there's a few things over here which are worthwhile noting. Number one is that the Psukim are very clear to note that they forgot both God and Gidon. Right? Let's go back to the war cry for a second. What was the war cry as they streamed down the mountain into battle? It was La Hashem, Cherev La Hashem Ula Gidon. There was an element of him being this lightning rod of power as he goes into battle, meaning I am the representative of God, La Hashem Ula Gidon, right? And that's true because how do we relate to God? We relate to God through people. If a person has a damaged relationship with their parents and there's, God forbid, abuse, that person is going to also struggle the relationship with God to a large degree because a parent figure, right, betrayed them, right? This is a very complex business. Gidon is this parent or monarch figure who ran into battle. He's the name of everything, but it didn't matter. They forgot both God and the messenger of God, meaning the Psukim are clear to emphasize that both of these are forgotten. And there's a last footnote, and we'll end with this because this is the end of our time, and this is the last note of Abarbanel. Abarbanel says there's a very chilling ending to the story. Because take a look at the very last source. It says, Hinei nichtavas lipor hazeh. The Bible tucks us away at the end of his Perush, and he says, this story is written for a reason. Lo yedionu rishas b'nei Yisrael. To teach us just how apathetic, or the evil of the nation of Israel. She'aru legidon mishol bonu gam ata gam mincha. 2 minutes ago they said, you'll be a leader and your children will be leaders. V'od ma'at. And in just a moment, when we get to next parak, I'm sorry to give it away. All his kids are going to be killed. Right? So then you say, suddenly, what do you really mean? Do you really want a king? Do you really want him? Right? It says, V'himlichu es Avimelech ben Amasom. You're going to see how Avimelech takes over. V'gam acharei Moshe shenishar Yotam ben Gidon lo yikimu aleim l'mashol. The mashal. They didn't even take Yotam later on his remaining son. In fact, Abarbanel says, and that's maybe what Gidon himself was saying. He didn't even realize. Niba v'lo yoda ma sheniba. What do they say to him? You become a king. What does he say? I won't be a king. My children won't be kings. He wasn't just making a statement. He was saying a prophecy, which was ultimately is that he was saying, I will never be your king, and you will kill my children because you are ungrateful enough that you won't even want my children. And maybe in a certain sense, maybe Gidon's declining the kingship wasn't just because of himself, but because he saw the people weren't ready. And the proof is in the pudding because they weren't ready. They sway like they flap like the wind. One moment they like this guy and they're with him. The next moment they're going to betray him and go with his illegitimate son and his pretending to the throne as well. So complex. We're going to get to next week into the most incredible parak. The topic of the next parak is bad followership. That's going to be the topic which we're going to follow through. An incredible parak for Ezra Hashem. Looking forward to learning with you. Thank you so much everybody for coming.